Я прекращаю свою деятельность на посту президента СССР.
1991. The Soviet Union is dissolved. The country is affected by a serious economic crisis. The reformists hope that a new era will begin, where freedom of speech, democracy, and economic health will prevail. There was a lot of hope in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. The new government made efforts to establish a democratic system. Unfortunately, Putin's arrival coincided with a regressive democracy in Russia because of his vision of a strong central government.
Just a small town girl living in a lonely world.
Человек и несколько десятков полицейских были ранены.
20 years passed. Russia's economy partly recovered, but we can't say the same thing about its democracy. December 10th, 2011, Moscow. More than 80,000 people take to the streets to protest against the results of the legislative elections. The party United Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, officially got 49.32% of the votes. However, according to the estimations of independent organizations, the quantity of votes of this party would have been around 30%. The protesters are tired of the corruption that is ruining the Russian system. The elites are not preoccupied by the huge problems Russia is facing. They are pumping more and more money from the population for their personal interests.
We ain't gonna take it. Oh, we're not gonna take it anymore. We've got the right to choose it. There ain't no way we'll lose it. This is our life. This is our song.
Nowadays, it is clear that the dream of the reformists has failed. For example, in Rostov, a Russian oblast, the votes totalized 146% of the electors, probably because the authors of the fraud forgot to remove the votes of the other parties. The existence of these irregularities is known everywhere, even in Russia.
But why are Russians accepting this situation? One of the considerable problems in the system of Russia is that quite an important part of the population thinks that Putin has played a major role in the economic recovery of the country. Even without ballot stuffing, his party would have probably won the last poll. And there's a reason for this. Putin is almost monopolizing the broadcasting time during the campaigns. And so his opposition doesn't even have the exposure that is needed to convince the population for change.
Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name.
So the problem right now is that Putin's opposition doesn't have the exposure and is not able to get in contact with the Russian people. And the effect of that problem is that the Russians only have Putin's view of the Russian context.
Just don't think contest that because you don't know us, you don't belong. Oh, we're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. Oh, we're not gonna take it.
In addition to Putin's control of his opposition's appearances in the media, there is a strange phenomenon that is happening right now in Russia. Since 1993, more than 300 journalists have been assassinated. Most of them were criticizing the regime. The most famous murdered journalist is probably Anna Politkovskaya in 2006. She was militating against Putin and the Chechen government, which was guilty of crimes against human rights. But she's not the only victim. Natalia Estemirova, 2009. Shortly before her murder, she had contributed to a Human Rights Watch report on the punitive burning of houses by regional authorities. Maxim Maximov, 2006. He had investigated the murders of several Russian businessmen and politicians, including Galina Starovoytova, a parliamentary deputy shot in her apartment building in 1998. Magomed Yevloyev, 2008. In Gushetia, his website had reported governmental corruption, human rights abuses, unemployment, and a string of unsolved disappearances and killings in recent months.
Mrs. C was a journalist in Russia. To practice her profession in an honest way, she had no choice but to leave her country.
Before we even start this interview, I have to mention that Mrs. C doesn't want us to show you her face or reveal her name because of safety issues. So, first question. Why did you leave Russia? Were you forced to do it? How do you feel about this whole situation?
Я уехала из России 3 года назад. В мои планы никогда не входила иммиграция в другую страну, но, к сожалению, положение дел в России в отношении прав человека и свободы слова было и остается довольно сложным.
Corruption takes a lot of governance and financial resources, which are needed for democratic and economical reforms. Nowadays, in Russia, there is a serious demographic issue that needs to be fixed quickly. Unfortunately, corruption and the indifference of the elite to this problem stop these reforms.
You talked about corruption, but could you specify what are its main threats for Russia's future?
Коррупция в России затрачивает огромное количество отечественных
Freedom of speech is still in very bad shape in Russia. For journalists, there is no other option than emigration. When it comes to serious journalistic investigation about certain taboos, some threats arise. Sometimes it is impossible to find a job if you are considered as a politically incorrect journalist.
Do you see any solution to this particular situation?
Это займет достаточно большой срок.
It will take a long time, because Russia has no real democratic experience. There is not even a real organized opposition in Russia. I hope that the next generation will succeed to rebuild this society in a new way and that the future government won't rule for decades. The present administration has to retire.
But there is still hope for Russia.
Let me introduce you to one of the most famous Russian militants, Alexei Navalny.
Да или нет? Да! Да или нет? Выйдут ли на улицы России миллионы? Да или нет?
With the disorganized and divided Russian opposition, Navalny is probably the only important political threat for the Kremlin. He is charismatic and very famous in his country. He led in 2011 the contestation against Putin's regime. He was able to mobilize thousands of citizens. Also, he has led, since a couple of years, an immense combat against corruption. Navalny does not hide his political intention. He has already announced that he wants to present himself against Putin at the next presidential election. Unfortunately, once again, the Russian government found a way to get rid of those who doesn't share its mentality. The Federal Investigation Committee is involving Navalny in a political trial. He is accused of embezzlement. According to the prosecution, he would have redirected $500,000 from a Wood State-owned corporation. During the past year, The investigation has been abandoned 4 times because of the deficiency of the proof. The impartiality of the court can also be questioned. Its judge has sentenced all the previous accused who came in front of him. A sentence would end Navalny's political career because he would be unable to present himself at the elections. This example is one of the numerous stratagems the government uses to get rid of its opponent. Navalny is not the first victim, nor the last victim, of these intolerable strategies.
Our goal with this video is to sensitize IB students and to lead citizens like you to participate in this fight against Putin's regime. One of the underlying conclusions of this video is that it is easier to fight this regime from the outside of the country rather than from the inside of the country. You can contribute to the cause by involving yourself in NGOs such as Committee to Protect Journalists, United Civil Front, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. If each of us takes action, we can be the change.
As long as hearts untainted live, as long as freedom keeps the fire, my friend, to fatherland we give the soul's most beautiful desire. Have faith, my comrade, it shall rise, the star of loveliest elation. Russia shall wake her slumbered eyes, and on oppression's ruination, our names they'll probably recognize.
Just a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took the